Welcome to USA Report. The message arrived quietly, without flashing headlines or breaking news banners, yet within minutes, it changed the direction of an investigation that had already haunted an entire community, because when authorities confirmed that new communications linked to Nancy Guthrie had surfaced, investigators knew this wasn't just another tip. It was the kind of development that forces law enforcement to rewind the tape and look again at what they thought they already understood. And in cases like this, where every hour matters and every assumption carries weight, even a single unexplained message can reopen doors that were believed to be firmly shut. Sources familiar with the inquiry describe the moment as tense rather than dramatic, the kind of tension that settles into a room when professionals realize their previous conclusions may have been incomplete because the messages were not random, not vague, and not easily dismissed. And while officials have been careful to describe them as under review, the mere fact that they triggered a re-sweep of Nancy Guthrie's home tells you everything you need to know about how seriously they were taken, since law enforcement does not revisit secured locations without reason, especially in cases that have already consumed significant resources. According to investigators, the decision to return to the home wasn't driven by panic but by protocol, because new information, especially information tied to digital communications, can alter timelines, challenge assumptions about movement, and raise uncomfortable questions about whether something critical was missed during earlier searches. And while authorities have stopped short of confirming the exact content of the messages, they have acknowledged that they were specific enough to justify another comprehensive examination of the property, from structural spaces to overlooked personal items. What makes this development especially unsettling is the implication that the messages may connect to a time window previously considered closed, because once a home has been processed, documented, and cleared, reopening it suggests the investigative narrative is evolving, not stagnating, and that evolution is rarely comfortable, as it forces both investigators and the public to confront the possibility that early interpretations, however logical they seemed at the time, may not have captured the full reality of what happened. Neighbors noticed the change immediately, with unmarked vehicles returning, officers moving deliberately but without spectacle, and forensic teams working with a level of focus that suggested this was not a routine follow-up, because in high-profile investigations, optics matter, and when law enforcement re-enters a scene quietly rather than loudly, it often signals confidence that something meaningful might be uncovered, rather than a desire to reassure the public with visible activity. Analysts watching the case point out that digital messages have become some of the most powerful and dangerous pieces of modern evidence, because they can be misinterpreted, delayed, manipulated, or misunderstood, yet they can also reveal intent, fear, planning, or deception in ways physical evidence sometimes cannot. And when such messages surface after weeks or months of silence, investigators must consider whether they represent a delayed signal from the past or a fresh attempt to influence the present narrative. And this is where the story shifts from simple procedure to psychological pressure, because a re-sweep is not just about walls, floors, and objects. It's about testing theories, challenging instincts, and asking whether the truth has been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for the right message to force investigators to look again. And as the search resumed behind closed doors, one thing became clear to everyone following this case. The story of Nancy Guthrie was not moving toward closure. It was entering a more uncertain, more revealing phase. As the new sweep began, the atmosphere inside the Guthrie residence became almost cinematic in its tension, with every creak of floorboards and distant shuffle of evidence bags magnified by the stakes of the investigation, because professionals trained for years in meticulous procedure suddenly found themselves questioning whether the home they had previously processed was truly silent, and whether their initial assumptions had inadvertently left gaps that could now hold answers. While outside, the quiet suburban streets seemed to pulse with anticipation, even though no one could articulate exactly what had changed. Investigators noted immediately that the messages themselves were unusual in tone and specificity, hinting at knowledge only someone intimately familiar with the household could possess, which prompted them to consider the possibility that these communications were not just random alerts, but carefully timed, intentional attempts to bring new elements to light, and that nuance forced a re-examination of every prior step, every item cataloged, and every statement taken, because in cases of disappearances, even a single overlooked detail can completely reshape the narrative and determine whether leads are actionable or dead ends. A forensic team's approached with surgical precision, combing through spaces that had already been documented, photographing, measuring, and logging every corner, because in situations like this, the risk is always twofold: missing evidence a second time or contaminating a scene that is no longer pristine, and the balance between thoroughness and care created a tension that was nearly palpable, as if each step taken inside the home could tilt the outcome of an entire investigation. While outside, the world waited for news that would likely not arrive for hours. The psychological weight on the investigative team was obvious even to casual observers, because experienced officers and agents who are accustomed to structured, sequential work were now operating under a cloud of uncertainty. The resweep demanded not just skill, but imagination, intuition, and the willingness to revisit conclusions they had previously believed definitive, while simultaneously resisting the human impulse to overinterpret ambiguous signals, which in high-stakes cases can be as dangerous as missing a clear lead. Analysts following the situation remarked that the emergence of these messages represented a turning point in the narrative, a moment when the flow of information forced everyone involved to reconsider timing, motive, and the potential reach of whoever was responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, because in investigations of this nature, a single message can collapse or expand timelines in ways that no physical evidence alone can. And the strategic significance of digital communication in modern law enforcement means that even a minor text, email, or social post can trigger searches, subpoenas, or full forensic sweeps. The stakes were further amplified by the understanding that any discovery during this resweep could generate both answers and new questions simultaneously, because the first sweep had established a baseline, and anything uncovered now would have to be interpreted in relation to everything already known, challenging every prior assumption about sequence, intent, and the level of sophistication behind the actions that led to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And in that sense, each drawer opened, each electronic device examined, and each note photographed became a small window into a much larger puzzle. Finally, the resweep illuminated the broader narrative arc of modern investigations, that nothing is ever truly settled until every credible lead has been exhausted. Because in cases where missing persons are involved, time, technology, and human psychology intersect in unpredictable ways, and what looks like a closed chapter may only be the prelude to new revelations, while the tension outside the home among both media and neighbors mirrored the suspense inside, demonstrating how a single prompt, a seemingly small new message, can ripple outward to reshape perception, drive action, and redefine the stakes for everyone involved in the hunt for truth. As investigators dug deeper into the Guthrie residence during this resweep, every object seemed to carry an amplified significance, from a casually discarded pen to a digital device tucked behind furniture. Because in missing person cases, even the most mundane item can reveal patterns of behavior or overlooked interactions, and the team's focus was razor sharp, their eyes scanning for anomalies that might have been dismissed the first time around. While internally, each officer wrestled with the awareness that the smallest oversight could mean a lost opportunity to solve a mystery that had already gripped the community for weeks. The messages that prompted this resweep acted almost like a silent conductor, guiding every movement in the home with a precision that was both unnerving and illuminating. Because as the agents traced paths through living rooms, bedrooms, and offices, they realized that timing, sequence, and placement of items were no accident. Someone had curated their environment, knowingly or unknowingly, in a way that would influence what investigators would see. And this invisible choreography forced a new level of attention and patience that taxed even the most seasoned professionals. Every reaction inside the room became a study in human instinct under pressure. Because when an agent discovers a note that doesn't align with prior evidence, or a device that suddenly provides access to conversations previously unknown, the decision-making process has to balance immediate interpretation with methodical verification, knowing that the wrong move could contaminate evidence, jeopardize admissibility in court, or mislead colleagues. And yet hesitation could allow time-sensitive leads to degrade or vanish entirely, creating a constant tension that felt almost cinematic in its intensity. The team also had to contend with the invisible emotional undercurrent, because anyone who has been inside a home tied to a missing person feels the weight of absence, and that weight becomes a character in its own right, influencing perception, heightening anxiety and subtly affecting the choices made in real time, whether it was which drawer to search first or how to handle sensitive digital devices. And this human factor underscored that investigations are never purely mechanical. They are profoundly affected by the instincts, reactions, and psychological resilience of those involved. Strategic discussions between agents and analysts were ongoing as every new finding required immediate cross-referencing with previous logs, call records, and witness statements because the emergence of the latest message meant that timelines needed recalculation, inconsistencies had to be re-examined, and hypotheses that were once considered stable now teetered on the edge of reconsideration. And this constant mental juggling created a rhythm of tension and insight, like watching a suspense thriller unfold in real time with stakes that could never be fully paused or controlled. Even as the resweep progressed, questions about motive and opportunity hovered in the air because the content and precision of the messages implied an intelligence behind them that could not be dismissed as random, and investigators had to ask themselves whether the communications were designed to manipulate, reveal, or mislead, with each possibility carrying profound implications for both the evidence they uncovered and the narrative they would ultimately construct. While every small reaction, from a raised eyebrow to a whispered suggestion, became a clue to the unseen pressures shaping the room. By the time the sweep reached the final rooms, the team had developed a cohesive but tentative picture of the scene because patterns began to emerge from the chaos. Items moved, devices that had been overlooked, and messages that corroborated earlier reports, all coming together in a way that reinforced the idea that persistence, patience, and acute observational skill could reveal truths that had been hidden even from those who had originally entered the home. And this delicate balance between chaos and order, insight and intuition, underscored why high-profile investigations demand both technical precision and an almost narrative sense of storytelling to piece together the full picture of what had occurred. The messages that triggered the resweep weren't just notifications, they acted as a compass pointing toward anomalies previously overlooked, because when investigators revisited the Guthrie home, they found subtle disruptions in normal patterns. Objects slightly out of place, digital devices powered on in ways inconsistent with prior logs, and notes that contradicted earlier assumptions, all of which demanded meticulous attention, and every officer had to weigh instinct against protocol, knowing that the line between a critical lead and a dead end could be razor thin, and that the next discovery might either break the case wide open or misdirect hours of effort. As agents moved through each room, their reactions revealed the human side of high-stakes investigation, because tension manifested in small ways: hesitations at doorways, repeated double checks of evidence, whispered cross-checks with colleagues, and the unfolding drama wasn't just about the physical evidence, but about the mental and emotional endurance required to process it without bias, fatigue, or tunnel vision, all while the clock ticked toward deadlines that could define the outcome of the case. One of the most dramatic moments came when investigators found a set of recently sent digital messages tucked away in a seemingly ordinary notebook, because the timing and phrasing suggested a level of awareness by the sender that contradicted earlier profiles, forcing the team to immediately reconsider prior assumptions about motive and opportunity, and to ask whether someone inside the home had been observing them, aware of procedural gaps, and potentially attempting to manipulate the investigation, which created a palpable tension that filled the rooms with a sense of imminent revelation. Throughout the sweep, the instincts of the lead agents proved critical because understanding not just what was present, but what was missing, required analytical foresight that blurred the lines between fact-finding and psychological reading of the environment, and as they pieced together the sequence of events implied by the messages, it became evident that the home itself had been subtly staged, whether intentionally or through neglect, to mislead or conceal, demanding both creativity and rigor from the investigative team to reconstruct the narrative accurately. Conflict arose internally as well, because team members debated which leads to prioritize, balancing the risk of contaminating evidence against the urgency of acting on time-sensitive information. And these debates were amplified by the knowledge that every decision, every movement could be scrutinized in court, potentially affecting credibility and case integrity, while outside pressure, media attention, public expectation, and the emotional weight of the Guthrie family's absence intensified the stakes, adding layers of tension invisible to the casual casual observer. The discovery of a digital trail linking the new messages to previously unidentified devices heightened suspense because it created the possibility of new connections and previously unknown players, and each finding required rapid interpretation. Was this a breakthrough or a red herring? Was someone trying to guide investigators toward the truth or manipulate them into wasting precious time? The interplay between evidence and intuition became almost cinematic, a chess match in real time where every move had immediate consequences and every hesitation could cost clarity in a case already charged with emotion and public scrutiny. By the end of the day, as investigators wrapped the resweep, the narrative began to crystallize because the combination of physical evidence, newly discovered messages, and behavioral cues provided a multidimensional picture of what may have transpired, highlighting both the meticulous planning behind the communication and the strategic patience required by law enforcement to interpret it properly. And this blending of strategy, instinct, and analysis illustrated why these investigations are as much about storytelling and insight as they are about technical skill, leaving viewers and analysts alike questioning what will come next and how each clue will ultimately fit into the larger, suspenseful puzzle. The aftermath of the resweep began with a delicate balancing act because every piece of evidence demanded careful interpretation, and investigators had to differentiate between signals that revealed truth and distractions designed to mislead, and the tension was palpable as they cross-referenced the new messages with previous surveillance interviews and forensic data, constructing a timeline that had to withstand scrutiny in court, because in cases like the Guthrie disappearance, even the smallest misstep could unravel months of work and public trust. Each room in the Guthrie home told a story that wasn't obvious at first glance, and the subtle interactions between objects, devices, and personal effects required investigators to rely on both instinct and analytical rigor because the messages weren't just digital footprints. They hinted at human behavior, decision-making under stress, and patterns that could expose motives, opportunities, and hidden relationships, transforming a physical sweep into a psychological investigation that probed the mind as much as the house itself. Tension escalated as analysts identified connections between the new messages and prior communications that had been dismissed as irrelevant, because suddenly what had seemed like minor anomalies became key to understanding who had access to the Guthrie family's routines, what knowledge was being concealed, and how these patterns fit within the broader context of potential suspects, creating a sense of urgency where each discovery demanded immediate validation, verification, and contextual placement, or risk being disregarded entirely. Inside the command center, investigators debated the implications of each message because interpreting digital evidence is as much about reading intent as it is about reading content. And the team realized that behavioral analysis would be essential to predict next moves, anticipate false leads, and understand not just what had happened, but what could happen if the case escalated. And that interplay between foresight and evidence created a narrative tension that was almost cinematic in its precision and stakes. The personal stakes for the team were also high, because the Guthrie family's safety remained an open question, and every message, every trace, and every clue carried weight beyond courtroom strategy. It was about preventing harm and discovering truth under pressure, and this dual responsibility intensified the meticulousness of the sweep, demanding both vigilance and rapid, high-stakes decision-making, which turned routine forensic procedure into a suspenseful, tension-filled operation that felt closer to a thriller than a methodical investigation. A conflict arose organically as interpretations diverged because some agents favored immediate action on the newly surfaced leads, while others cautioned patience to avoid contaminating the scene or misreading context. And this debate underscored the human element in law enforcement. The instinct to act versus the discipline to wait, the fear of missing a critical clue versus the fear of creating a false lead, and the constant mental balancing required to navigate an investigation that could change with the next message, the next observation, or the next unexamined corner of the Guthrie home. By the close of the resweep, a clearer picture began to emerge because the combination of new messages, previously overlooked details, and meticulous behavioral analysis allowed investigators to piece together sequences of action and inaction, revealing patterns that suggested deliberate concealment, attempts to misdirect, and subtle indicators of a broader plan, all of which transformed isolated clues into a connected narrative, reinforcing the idea that in high-stakes investigations, the story is hidden in the intersection of evidence, behavior, and timing, leaving viewers and analysts riveted, anticipating the next revelation. The final hours of the resweep were nothing short of electrifying because every new message unlocked potential revelations about the Guthrie family's disappearance. And the investigators could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on them, knowing that any misinterpretation could not only compromise the case, but also put lives at risk. And as they cross-referenced timestamps, digital metadata, and personal habits, the tension in the command center mirrored the high-stakes drama unfolding in the home itself, creating a narrative that was as psychological as it was procedural. Patterns began to emerge with shocking clarity because the new messages weren't random. They revealed behavioral consistencies, repeated attempts to obfuscate, and subtle markers that only the most experienced analysts could detect, highlighting how the perpetrators adapted, responded, and attempted to control the narrative from behind the scenes. And this insight gave law enforcement a strategic edge, turning what initially seemed like scattered digital chatter into a coherent roadmap of actions, intentions, and risks that demanded immediate tactical consideration. Inside the Guthrie home, forensic specialists worked meticulously to extract every shred of potential evidence because each phone, tablet, or device could hold a crucial fragment that might tie communications to physical movements, interactions, or even threats. And as each message was validated and traced, the investigation revealed the chilling reality of how carefully the family's routines had been monitored, manipulated, and potentially exploited, making the stakes intensely personal and emotionally charged for both the team and the public following the case. The human element became impossible to ignore because behind every message was a living, breathing individual making choices, weighing risks, and taking calculated steps to achieve their goals. And as analysts interpreted tone, phrasing, and frequency, they began to reconstruct the psychological state of the suspect, providing a rare glimpse into decision-making under extreme pressure. And this character-driven insight allowed investigators to anticipate future moves, understand possible motivations, and prepare for contingencies in a way that made the investigation feel almost like decoding a thriller in real time. Conflict and urgency collided as investigators weighed the credibility of each lead because some messages suggested imminent danger while others appeared to be intentional misdirection. And balancing the instinct to act immediately with the discipline to verify facts became a high-stakes exercise in judgment, strategy, and patience, revealing the invisible tension that drives every successful investigation, the fine line between seizing a lead and preserving the integrity of the overall case. And in that balance lay the true suspense of the operation. As the resweep concluded, investigators had uncovered a network of digital breadcrumbs that connected seemingly unrelated actions, demonstrating a level of planning and intent that was both chilling and illuminating. And the analysis of these messages not only clarified past events, but also framed the path forward, giving law enforcement the ability to predict next steps, understand vulnerabilities, and tighten the investigative net, all while maintaining the procedural integrity required for a successful prosecution, turning a complex, chaotic scene into a structured, strategic narrative. In the end, the resweep of Nancy Guthrie's home revealed far more than evidence. It revealed the meticulous choreography of a high-stakes criminal scenario, the psychological fingerprints of those involved, and the extraordinary coordination required by investigators to uncover truth under pressure. And for the audience watching this story unfold, the lesson is clear. In cases like this, patience, analysis, and attention to detail aren't just procedural. They're life-saving, justice-defining, and utterly compelling, leaving every viewer to ask themselves, what would you do if faced with a trail this complex, deceptive, and urgent?